My father was a managerial genius, and my brothers and I owe our success to the forceful way that he pushed us. I couldn't miss a step.
Michael was a boy with the old man's soul. My father did a brilliant job. He had a dream, he had direction, and he knew how to get there. My father prepared his sons. We were men at a very young age.
Practice. I practiced a lot.
Not only were we practicing, we were nervous rehearsing because he sat in a chair and he had this bell in his hand. And if you missed a step, he would tear you up.
This is the story of a child who transformed a family that transformed a generation, and how fame transformed Michael Jackson. This is the Thriller Effect.
I remember the band recording the song "I'm a Big Boy Now."
Keith.
Right. Mr. Keith had given us a week to practice his songs to see if we could make a record out of them. Naturally, we were excited. We wanted to make a record. And in those days, having a record with your group's name on it was quite something. We felt very fortunate.
My name is Leroy Phillips. I was a record promoter for Wonderful Records. That is where I first met Mr. Gordon Keith.
Gordon Keith produced the Jacksons' very first recordings before they double-crossed me and went to Motown.
Gordon Keith brought Michael Jackson and the Jackson 5 down to Wonderful Records to record them.
Wonderful recording company which was owned by Ernie Lehner.
Ernie Lehner of Lehner Brothers were early adapters in the Chicago area. They owned radio stations, music halls, recording studios. One of those studios and record labels was Wonderful Records.
He kept them down there trying to record them.
When we get out of school, we always meet up at Wonderful Studio. So happened Eddie Silver had the Jackson 5, Jackie, Michael, Tito, and Jermaine, and their cousin, I forget his name, he played the drum. They were recording him. I'm a big boy now.
Mr. Keith met us at the door and opened the studio. I put on some big metal headphones.
The budget wasn't big, it was nothing. We could have recorded this song in our living room.
We were told to listen to Mr. Keith. The record would take care of itself.
They were already playing the song when I came into the studio practicing, but they couldn't get the sound together. I walked in the studio, and Eddie Silver asked me, did I hear my guitar? And he said, grab the guitar, I want you to play this other part with them. But there's both of us playing. We had to split that up. It's the Jackson 5 playing. Tito is playing. Their cousin's playing the drums. Otis Hayes, he was the engineer. By me being on the staff there, I was asked to show Jermaine how to keep his bass from booming. And that's where I came in, to help them get the sound together.
You have to imagine a skinny 9-year-old singing this song. I was far too young to grasp the real meanings of most of the words. I just sang what they gave me. It was a nice song about a kid who wanted to fall in love with some girl. After the records were pressed, Mr. Keith gave us some copies so that we could sell them after shows.
I have the original demos before we even recorded them ourselves.
Bud Presner walked into the studio and said, Ben, I need to talk to you in the control room. And my friend was there with a demo tape. When I heard it, I heard Michael's voice.
Ben Brown was the first person to really take a chance on the Jacksons. The Jackson 5 recorded their first single, called Big Boy, and it was a minor hit in 5 states.
I have a hit. They had a #1 record with Steeltown.
It might have not been as big as the Motown, but that was their first record.
I had a contract with Atlantic Records in reference to the Jacksons' very first record, Big Boy.
The partnership set up at Steeltown included Ben Brown, Bud Presner, Gordon Keith, etc. The distribution agreement with Atco, Atlantic Records, was constructed by VP Henry Allen. Like we said in episode 2, new record labels were popping up all the time. Everyone was looking for the next big thing. Not even the Jacksons knew that they were it.
And Gary, that record began to get radio play.
When I first heard myself on the radio, the song sounded so much better than it did in the recording studios. I cranked it all the way up.
We became a big deal in Out Neighborhood.
Big Boy was a hit record in several regions.
After that, we began to aim for all the big talent shows.
So this record brought them to the Apollo Theater in 1968.
A gentleman, his name was Baby James, came into the union, knocked on my door.
Baby James was part of James Brown's New York operation. And who was James Brown? Well, James Brown, we all know. Godfather of Soul, Mr. Excitement. And by 1968, the Mafia was a dominant player. The Mafia influenced radio, performances, sometimes they even owned the venue. Without going into a whole history, New York was a Mafia stronghold. Alan Leeds, longtime tour manager for James Brown, describes a pretty dangerous environment for entertainers.
Mr. Brown was a razor-sharp businessman. He knew his way around. He owned his own little Learjet. You had to be able to think on your feet and deal with all kinds of people, some of whom you wouldn't want in your house. With a lot of hustlers and a lot of people with ulterior motives who meant you no good, both financially and even sometimes physically.
James Brown had his fingerprints all over the entertainment business. Brown realized early on that he had to be more than just an entertainer. James would have to institute some fail-safes. One example of a James Brown fail-safe was the security team he called his hit squad. Baby James was one of James Brown's trusted sidemen. In the James Brown biography, Kill 'Em and Leave, James McBride describes the job James required a sideman to do. James McBride writes, James felt cornered in the North. The mob had a strong hand in the music business. And when James Brown came to New York to play the Apollo, mobsters would make offers. James always refused. Then the threats would come. They'd threaten to beat me down or release rats into the theater. I'd say, let them come. Brown's New York team consisted of Henry Stallings, John Terry, Willie Glenn, and Baby James Pearson. This was James Brown's hit squad. James boasted that his hit squad would, quote, kill a man for $1,000. They all carried 38 caliber pistols in their breeches and were not afraid to shoot, unquote. In R.J. Smith's The One, The Life and Times of James Brown, Baby James Pearson is described, quote, he was a different kind of person, extraordinarily rough. We had to keep him straight. Henry Stallings continued, see, you gotta give a little, you gotta take a little. Baby was the type to take it all. When Mr. Brown asked him to do stuff, Baby would be doing it to death.
First I said, how'd you get up here through the union? He said, well, I just walked up. He said he had a group coming in. He wanted me to make sure that he be the manager of the Jackson 5. He wanted me to have these papers ready the next day.
And they were still little amateurs. They went on to St. Louis and Philadelphia.
Joseph was talking to many people.
Attorney Richard Arons, one of the very people that helped the Jacksons double-cross me.
I have to go to 52nd Street to the booking agency that got him into the Apollo. They started peeling $100 bills off.
James, this is Ben Bart.
Ben Bart founded Universal Attractions, and James was one of its most promoted artists. As a matter of fact, he was also his manager. Ben Bart and James Brown had a very close business and personal relationship. Universal Attractions was and remains the biggest booking agency in the entertainment industry, or at least one of them. The Jackson 5 were about 1 year away from becoming one of the biggest live acts in the country. There were a lot of people looking to get a piece.
I didn't know that much about booking. They said, baby, you go back to Gary and get them to the Apollo. After I saw that these professional guys giving him hundreds to go, I said, get them to sign it. You're the manager. They come into New York.
We got to the Apollo at 125th Street.
At the Apollo Theater, it was a place where talent would go and try to win.
The great entertainers, the great performers, the great showmen, the Apollo, the real entertainers, man, the real ones make you get goosebumps.
My father used to always say, don't mess up. I felt I knew every part. If something went wrong, I felt I could cover it.
We walked through the theater staring at all of the pictures of the stars. They were my teachers.
You had Moms Mabley or Etta James were the acts that came in, or Sam and Dave.
Etta James was the headliner, and the Jacksons were third.
At the Apollo Theater, if you win there, you could perform any place in the world. But if you didn't win...
If they don't like you, they start standing up, get off, and the guy comes on and shoves them off.
And grabbing the hook and hooking them on stage. That came on before us. The crowd started throwing eggs at him and stuff like that because they were bad. You know, he would cry like a baby. So we would try to calm him and say, Mike, just do your thing. Everything's going to be okay. Because he didn't want them throwing eggs on him. He forget they're going to do the same thing to him.
They appear at the Apollo. And I went and I saw the group.
You have to touch the stump of the head on stage.
They come on and it was amazing. This little kid, the people go nuts. This kid was sensational. They sing like they were meant to be together. And then Michael, he was like 10 years old. I was blown away by their talent.
It just happens when I come on stage and you feel the audience, the forces back and forth. When they get aroused, we get aroused. And it's just a wonderful feeling. I'm really not that outgoing when I'm off stage. When I'm on stage, it's totally different, really.
It's me.
What?
You won, baby. You won.
Well, most artists get on stage when they get ready to perform. They don't have any magic in what they're doing on stage. Michael had it all, you know.
We came on amateur night and did our thing, and people enjoyed us.
We won the Apollo Amateur Night Competition, and I felt like going back to those photos on the walls and thanking my teachers.
James Brown's record label, People, was about to come online in around 1969. Here's Frankie Crocker and James Brown discussing their Michael Jackson post-Apollo reaction.
Well, we know we had him at the Apollo Theater. He did a James Brown imitation, and Michael Jackson is doing James Brown, the dance, everything. And that's one of the reasons he caught our eye at the Apollo Theater, because there's this young kid who really could do James Brown. Well, you know that.
James Brown had his own airplane, his own recording station, his own fast food restaurant. If he was going to launch People Records, you have to believe that he was aware of the 9-year-old in the Midwest doing a dead-on James Brown stage show. So was Baby James trying to strong-arm Joseph Jackson, or was he acting on behalf of Mr. Brown? The timing and certain claims Mr. Brown would make later on suggest that Baby James was doing James Brown business.
They had to do 5 times a day at the Apollo.
Having just won the amateur night competition, the Jackson 5 were now set up for weeks of shows at the Apollo Theater during that year.
See, the Apollo Theater was a place that Michael Jackson and his brothers went through me on my show.
Okay, the Jackson 5, Emotions, and Five Stair Steps, and Ronnie Millsap. We all did the Apollo together the very first time we did it.
How many shows we used to do, Marlon, at the Apollo?
7 shows a night or something
6
like
or 7 shows a day.
We played the Apollo Theater. They stole the show from everybody.
If I did a great show, he would tell me it was a good show. If I did an okay show, he would say nothing. He seemed intent, above all else, I need tissue, I'm sorry, on making us a commercial success.
I told the manager of the hotel, I'll pay for everything. I'll pay for the room.
Most of the artists staying for return engagements at the Apollo would stay at the Teresa Hotel, about a block away.
Within that week, Joe says to me, "You're a lawyer. I like you. I don't want Baby James to manage them. He owes me money, didn't pay me back, so get the contracts back."
Here we are at the Apollo Theater. These guys are talking in a room, and I'm in another room resting. I overhear them talking about doing production and management and so forth, but they were not including me in the conversation.
Joe told me that he wanted me to work with him. Joe asked me to help him manage the Jackson 5. He signed a piece of paper with me.
I went to Atlantic Records to get an advance on money. They gave me $500. I was talking to Henry Allen, vice president for Atlantic Records. He said, "Well, Gordon, Joseph Jackson and the Jacksons have been here with their own attorney. They say that you don't represent them anymore." I catch up with Joseph Jackson at the Apollo Theater, and I asked him to go out to the back with me. So we went out back, and I told Joseph what Henry Allen had told me. So I said, "What is going on?" And he told me, he said, "Gordon, man, I'm just trying to make it."
After the Apollo, we kept an eye on the phone. We had to keep the lines clear in case anyone from a record company wanted to get in touch with us.
We got a call from David Frost Show.
Someone who had seen us at the Apollo recommended us to the David Frost Show in New York City.
At the beginning of the episode, Michael said that his father was a managerial genius, and there's more than enough evidence of his skill. Joe Jackson understood that although James Brown was a force in music, Universal Attraction was really the man behind the curtain. Because of this dynamic and the degrees of separation that would inevitably keep Joseph from making career decisions for the Jackson 5, Joseph aligned himself with Richard Arons. It's really clear powerful entities were attempting to get control even in the earliest stages of the Jackson 5's career. Next episode, the Jackson 5 are taken to Motown, and we find out that Joseph has recognized a massive source of power and leverage behind Richard Arons.